effectively getting information behind Beyonce because she will be the name that resonates with so many people around the world. She is an artist and a businesswoman who has a following that cuts across age and gender and race. This beehive, as they're called, is going to be a formidable force. And so to have Beyonce step out in front now, do something that she doesn't often do, and that is step out and make a statement politically with this sort of appearance is something that could have a major impact in these last days of the election. Of course, we noted that Vice President Harris will be here in Georgia tonight with former President Obama, also with Bruce Springsteen and several other celebrities as well. Again, the goal here, Jose, is to sort of harness the enthusiasm that the campaign believes it's been able to build and not only get people to support Vice President Harris, but to actually go out and vote in these days where early voting is already happening in so many places, and of course on Election Day on November 5th, Jose.
And Garrett, meanwhile, you're in Tempe, Arizona, where Trump is campaigning today. What's his message?
Well, Jose, I expect we're going to hear a healthy dose of immigration from Donald Trump here in Arizona. It's his favorite issue. He repeatedly says he thinks it's the most important issue. Polls show it tends to be the second most important issue among most voters. But Trump is absolutely convinced it's going to be the key element of his closing message. And we've heard a healthy dose on that issue over the last couple of days. Listen to this.
Trump's plan starts with sealing the border.
It's going to be the first order. It'll be done in the first hour of the first day.
The former president says he would resume construction of the border wall and reinstate policies like Remain in Mexico, which forces asylum seekers to remain in Mexico while awaiting court dates. Trump often deploying dark language when promising a mass deportation program to remove millions of undocumented immigrants already in the country.
We will not be conquered. We will reclaim our sovereignty.
And Jose, I'm also looking at my Trump crystal ball here and tell you that I predict you will also hear him reference this Beyonce appearance. Trump likes to use the celebrities who appear with Kamala Harris and other Democrats against them, arguing that they need the additional help to fill arenas and to try to gin up enthusiasm where he believes he can do that all himself. If he says it, you heard it here first. If he didn't, I apologize. And let me just say, I don't want Aaron's formation Easter egg to go totally unappreciated in this segment. That's good stuff.
Thank you very much. So, Aaron, we're also learning more about the Harris campaign's closing message. She's going to deliver it at the Ellipse.
You're right, Jose and Garrett. Thank you for noticing that. I put a lot of effort into that. The vice president is expected to give this closing argument speech, essentially, on the National Mall on Tuesday, right on the Ellipse. This is the space sort of between the Washington Monument and the White House, right in front of the White House. It's also the space where former President Trump gave that speech on January 6th, the one in which he called for people to go to the Capitol on the day that the election results were being certified back in 2020, for 2020, back in 2021. The vice president, we're told by a senior campaign official, will in that speech try to show a contrast between her and former President Trump. She'll try to sort of speak about the worst day that the campaign argues in former President Trump's presidency, January 6th, and the vision that the vice president has for an administration that is led by her. And so we will, of course, be watching closely to see how that speech plays out, the degree to which she elevates this message of optimism and also takes time to talk about former President Trump and what she has described as the danger he presents were he to win another election, Jose.
And Garrett, meanwhile, the former president has been focusing on part of his message to get his supporters to vote early, which is a contrast from what he did in 2020.
Yeah, Jose, and it's been really interesting, and it appears, at least so far, effective. It took a little while for Donald Trump himself to come around on this, even though the rest of the Republican Party was urging him to embrace things like mail-in ballots and in early voting. He's been talking about it more and more on the campaign trail, and we've seen it both anecdotally in places like here in Arizona, where we've met a lot of Trump voters lined up to vote early in Scottsdale, and in North Carolina, where I was earlier this week, where Republicans are seeing their best share of the early vote that they they've ever seen in early voting there. So whether this is the kind of thing where they're essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul and taking away election day votes with early votes, or whether we're seeing kind of real new enthusiasm for the Republican ticket, very much remains to be seen. But there is absolute quantitative movement towards voting early from Republicans, something that, again, the broader party has wanted to see for a while, and Donald Trump is really only just starting to embrace himself.
Aaron Gilchrist and Garrett Hake, musical pop knowledge wells both. Thank you for being with us this morning. With us now is Susan Rice, former ambassador to the United Nations and former director of President Biden's Domestic Policy Council. She is now a surrogate for the Harris-Walz campaign. Ambassador, it's great seeing you. I thank you for your time. I know the Vice President is going to be delivering her closing argument speech Tuesday at the Ellipse. We're just talking about that now in Washington. It's the same spot where Trump gave his speech on January 6th before the Capitol riot. What's the symbolism of that location and of the speech there?
Well, good to be with you, Jose. Thanks for having me. I think the speech next Tuesday on the Ellipse is a critical opportunity for the Vice President to deliver a closing argument that contrasts her vision for where she wants to take the country, which is a forward-looking, affirmative, and optimistic vision that unites the country, that is full of concrete programs and policies that will benefit the American people and help them ensure that costs come down and that their freedoms are respected and protected. In contrast to Donald Trump, who used that same location 4 years ago to launch the greatest assault on our democracy since the Civil War. And, you know, Donald Trump has been very clear in the closing days of his campaign that his presidency will be about revenge and retribution and going after what he frighteningly calls the enemy within, using the United States military against his political opponents or any American who might disagree with his approach to governing. So this opportunity for the Vice President to reiterate what she will bring as a responsible rule of law respecting commander-in-chief, in contrast to Donald Trump, who launched an insurrection on the Capitol from that very spot and is promising to do worse in his second term. Were he to get one, is a very important opportunity for her to say her final piece to the American people.
Yeah, you know, and how important is it in the just very few days that remain, as, you know, many people, millions have already started to vote. How important is it for the Vice President to give her very clear vision of the future and then balance the look back at the past?
Well, she's been very careful and very thorough in the 2-3 months now that she's been at the top of the ticket to lay out her Vice President Harris's vision for how she will govern as President of the United States, and to make clear that she represents a new generation of leadership. She's got, you know, very concrete and useful ideas for how to help Americans not just struggle to get by, but to really get ahead in a meaningful way. Her policies on making housing more affordable, bringing down the cost of groceries by a federal ban on price gouging, her commitment to strengthen and expand Social Security and Medicare, and ensure that the Affordable Care Act remains in place and that prices for health care can come down for average Americans. Her plans and policies are very concrete and specific, and they are about the future and about the American people, as opposed to Donald Trump, who remains only about himself and has the worst kind of vague policies, such as across-the-board tariffs on 20% of all goods coming into the United States, which would cost the average American family an additional $4,000 a year. So the contrast in policy couldn't be greater. But then there's also, Jose, the contrast in temperament and the purpose of governing. We heard General John Kelly, Trump's chief of staff, 4-star general, say very clearly that he saw in many respects, a fascist in Donald Trump. And that's what Jim Mattis has said, General Mattis. That's what General Mark Milley said. And we've heard Trump's own words that he wants Hitler's generals and he wants to govern like a dictator and terminate the Constitution and turn the U.S. military on his opponent. So the choice couldn't be more stark. It's about a forward-looking, inclusive, affirmative vision of what kind of country we can be when we turn the page on Donald Trump versus a dark past that Donald Trump wants to replicate and intensify going forward.
Ambassador, I want to turn to foreign affairs, if I could. I know you were National Security Advisor when, among other things, the United States dealt with Iran for that nuclear deal in 2015. Here's what former President Trump said about Iran in an interview with Hugh Hewitt this morning.
If necessary, will you use force to stop them from getting the nuclear weapon online, Mr. President?
Yes, I would.
So there's a very clear statement by the former president about the Iranian regime and nuclear weapons. What do you make of that?
Well, in some ways, I make very little of it. You know, that it has long been the policy of the United States, from President Obama, who I served, to President Biden, and going forward, that the United States will preserve all options and keep all options on the table to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. We had accomplished that substantially through a nuclear deal negotiated that set Iran's nuclear program back by considerable margin and ensured that there were inspectors and cameras and all of the like to see what Iran was doing. Donald Trump recklessly pulled out of that deal, had nothing to replace it, and now Iran is closer to having a nuclear weapon than it ever has been before. So keeping all the options on the table is sound policy. What is not sound policy is Donald Trump cheerleading an Israeli preemptive attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, which he did, a week or two ago. That would result in untold, destruction and a wider regional conflagration and war that's likely to draw in American personnel and forces, since we are based all over the region. That's reckless and dangerous and classic Donald Trump. But to affirm that the United States policy is to leave all options on the table to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, that's not innovative.
And Ambassador, finally, just interesting your description of what Donald Trump, his policy is vis-a-vis Israel and Israel's response to having been subjected to hundreds of missiles and drones and all kinds of different devices by Iran directly, and then through its proxies, Hezbollah also. What do you think the policy towards Israel should be by the vice president? And do you think it would be any different from the policy that President Biden has been carrying out since the October 7th massacre in Israel?
Well, Jose, first of all, let's be clear. The United States under President Biden and Vice President Harris has not only stood by Israel in its efforts to defend itself from two direct attacks from Iran, but we participated in repelling those attacks and ensuring that the consequences were de minimis. And the Vice President and President Biden have been very clear that we will do what is necessary to help Israel defend itself against Iranian attacks, Iranian threats, and Iranian proxies. That's a different question, though, in the moment, from what to do about the war in Gaza. Now